Hello, welcome. Ready for another journey into the unknown? Before we begin, I'd be happy to know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, make yourself comfortable. Put on your headphones, and try not to be overcome by fear. Music working at Carlos and Luis' house had been part of my routine for almost 5 years since Sofia was born. I was the one who took care of her most of the time. I prepared her food, combed her hair, organized her toys, and put her to sleep. I knew her fears and habits. I knew how to calm her down when she cried for no apparent reason, and how to distract her when she was bored. Despite this bond I created with the girl, there was always an invisible barrier between me and her parents. Not that they were rude or impolite to me, far from it. They always treated me with respect, but in a cold, formal way, as if I were just another piece of the functioning of that house. The house was immense, modern, full of glass windows and expensive furniture, and it was located in a gated community in the north of São Paulo. There were days when I felt like a ghost walking through those impeccable rooms, cleaning and tidying things that seemed untouched. Sofia, on the other hand, brought life to that place. She was a smart, talkative girl, full of energy. Whenever her parents were out, she would run to me and cling to my legs, following me everywhere in the house. I liked that, but at the same time, it gave me a pang in my chest to see how much she needed her parents' attention. Carlos and Luis were always busy with meetings, events, and trips. They always left early and came back late. When they were home, the interaction with Sofia was brief, almost mechanical. On good days, Sofia accepted it without questioning, but on bad days, she would shut down. At those times, she would stay quietly in the corner of the room, hugging one of her teddy bears. I would ask if everything was all right, and she would just nod her head without saying anything. I never insisted. I knew that children feel more than they speak, and I didn't want to overstep my bounds. The routine in that house was predictable. I would arrive early, prepare breakfast, help Sofia get dressed for school, and organize the house while she was out. When I returned, we would have lunch together, and then I would help her with her chores. The nights were peaceful. Almost it was always just the two of us, until bedtime when Carlos and Luis arrived. I was already retiring to my room, which was at the back of the house. I never got very involved in family matters, and they never bothered to share anything with me. But something changed a few weeks before that fateful morning. I noticed a strange distance between Carlos and Luis. They, who weren't the most affectionate couple in the world to begin with, now seemed like two strangers, sharing the same space. They barely looked at each other. The conversations were always short, cold. Sometimes Luis would just stand on the balcony for long minutes, staring into nothingness. Sofia started noticing it too. One night, she asked me if her parents were going to separate. I just smiled and said that sometimes adults get too busy. I don't know if she believed me. The next morning, Luis left without even saying goodbye to Sofia. Carlos spent most of the day locked in his office, talking on the phone, looking nervous. The tension in the house was thick, and Sofia clung to me all afternoon. Later, as I was making dinner, she looked up at me and whispered, "I heard Mom crying yesterday." Before I could answer, Carlos appeared. "I'm going out." Luis already left. "You can stay with Sofia." He left in a hurry, and the house fell silent. That night, I slept badly, dreaming of footsteps and whispers. I woke up to a muffled cry, but stayed in bed, trying to ignore the growing unease. They were sweating so much that I almost dropped the phone. I dialed the emergency number with trembling fingers, and as soon as I heard the operator's voice on the other end of the line, the words came out in a rush. "It's a child. She can't breathe. She's very weak. Please come quickly." The man on the other end asked some questions that I could barely process. Yes, she was alive, but breathing poorly. No, there were no signs of injury. Yes, I worked at the house. Her parents weren't there. Time seemed to drag on while he asked me to check her pulse, to try to keep her awake. I ran back to the sofa and took her little hand in mine. It was cold. "Sofia, listen to Marta. My love, look at me. Can you hear?" Her eyes opened a little. An immense effort for such a small gesture. Her mouth tried to move again, and this time an almost inaudible whisper escaped, but I felt the tears burning in my eyes. "I'm here, my angel. I'm here with you." The line was still open, then the operator told me that the ambulance was already on its way. He asked me to check if she was choking, if she had ingested anything. Something opened her little mouth slowly, but there was nothing there. Her body began to contract slightly, as if a chill ran down her spine. Hold on, Sophia, just a little longer. Each second seemed like an eternity. The silence of the house, the absence of her parents, the helplessness of not knowing what was happening. I had never felt so alone in my life. That's when I heard the front door open forcefully. Carlos and Louis rushed in, and the instant Louis saw Sophie on the sofa, his face contorted in horror. My God, what happened? What happened to my daughter? Before I could answer, I ran closer, touching the girl's face desperately. Carlos stopped beside her, white as paper, his eyes wide with panic. She was fine when we left. For God's sake, what happened? I don't know. My voice came out louder than I intended. I found her like this a little while ago. She can't breathe properly. I already called the ambulance. It's on its way. Louis S. suddenly turned to me, filled with an inexplicable fury. How could you find her like this? You weren't with her. I was sleeping, but I woke up and saw that the house was empty. Then I went looking for her, and that's how I found her. Carlos ran his hands over his face in despair. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. The seconds dragged on. Louis continued to stand beside his daughter, talking to her, begging her to stay awake. I could only stand there, feeling a knot tightening in my stomach. Something was wrong. Sophia didn't have any illness, nothing that would explain this. But then what was happening to her? It was at that moment that the sound of sirens filled the air and the front door was flung open. 2 paramedics rushed in, and Louis moved out of the way so they could examine Sophia. Everything happened too fast. One of them checked her breathing while the other prepared the equipment. Weak pulse, very low blood pressure. Now Carlos and Louis went with them, and I followed as if my body were on autopilot. The way to the hospital was a blur. I remember Louis holding his daughter's hand, murmuring desperate words. Carlos said nothing. He just stared blankly, completely still. When we arrived, doctors and nurses separated us. Sophia was taken inside while I stood there in the middle of the corridor, feeling the confusion spread through my mind. I didn't know if I should leave or if I was still part of it. I didn't know where I belonged, but one thing I knew. Something very wrong had happened in that house, and somehow I was sure that this tragedy hadn't been an accident. The hospital seemed to spin around me. Nurses ran around. Doctors went in and out of automatic doors while Carlos and Louis sat motionless in a row of chairs. I stayed close, but without daring to get too close. I wasn't family. I never was. The minutes dragged on. At some point, a doctor appeared, and I knew it was the end. Before he even said anything, the expression on Louise's face was that of someone still trying to understand if it was real. Carlos buried his face in his hands. Neither of them screamed or fell to the ground, crying as I imagined they would. They just stood there as if the world had collapsed on them. "We're so sorry," the doctor said. "We did everything we could." It was at that moment that Louis looked at me. A long, cold look, unlike anything I had ever seen before. I got goosebumps from head to toe without quite understanding why. After all that, everything happened too fast. At some point, I saw the police arrived and spoke with the doctors. First they went to Carlos and Louis. Then they came to me, Marta Alves. "We need you to come with us for questioning." My stomach collapsed, so I was taken back. As the house now teeming with police and investigators, lights flashed outside and neighbors huddled together whispering. I entered with a tight chest, feeling like an intruder in the house where I had spent the last few years. They asked me where I had been, when it all happened, what time I had last seen Sophia, and who else had entered the house. I tried to answer as best I could. With each answer, it seemed the questions came with even more suspicion. "You were the only adult in the house at the time of the incident, right?" "Yes. Yes, but I was sleeping when it all happened, so I couldn't confirm that the girl was okay during that time." I blinked, confused. She was fine when I went to sleep, but when she woke up, she was already in that state. I nodded, feeling my chest tighten. "Mara, do you realize that this makes you the prime suspect, don't you?" My eyes widened. Suspicion. The version we have so far is yours, without witnesses, without immediate medical explanations. The girl was in your care and now she's dead. The weight of those words fell on me like a ton. My body grew hot because cold. I would never hurt Sophia. My voice sounded desperate. I loved her. The police officers changed. Eyes jotted things down in notebooks. My heart was beating erratically. It wasn't long before Carlos and Louis returned from the hospital. Louis entered first, his face swollen and pale, when he saw me sitting in the living room surrounded by police officers. Something in his eyes lit up, and it wasn't sadness, it was anger. She was negligent. Her voice came out low, but full of hatred. She left my daughter alone. I didn't get up immediately. I never left Sophia alone. I was just sleeping. Louis came towards me, his eyes wide, his shoulders trembling. You should have been taking care of her. You were responsible. Carlos put his hand on his wife's shoulder, trying to pull it back, but she resisted. What did you do to my daughter, Marta? My whole body shuddered. I didn't do anything. You were alone with her. You and no one else. The words kept echoing in my head. Me and no one else. As if I were guilty. As if I had done something, Louis. Carlos said softly, as if trying to calm her down, but he didn't look at me the same way either. His expression was a mixture of grief and distrust. This doesn't make sense, I murmured. I would never hurt Sophia. The police officers kept looking at me as if they were evaluating my every reaction. Maybe it wasn't on purpose, one of them said, consulting his notes. Maybe it was an accident, a distraction. It wasn't an accident. Louis spat out the words. I left my daughter safe, and now she's dead. My head was spinning. Carlos ran his hand over his face, as if he were tired of everything. We can't rule out any possibility. I felt like my body had collapsed inside. Do you think it was me? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I was taken to the police station to give a formal statement. The interrogation was long. I repeated everything I knew. Said I would never hurt Sophia. That I never noticed anything strange. That I didn't know what had happened. But the doubt was already there. I spent hours sitting in that cold room looking at the table in front of me, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The image of Sophia in bed, weak and defenseless, haunted me. Something terrible had happened to her, but no one seemed interested in finding another answer. They just needed someone to blame. I stayed at the police station for hours, maybe a whole day, maybe more. Time lost its meaning. They asked the same questions again and again, looking for contradictions, hoping I would give in, but there was nothing to confess. I was telling the truth. I didn't know what had happened to Sophia. Then a change. Policeman. He entered the room with a different look, carrying a folder under his arm. He sat down in front of me and, for the first time, didn't ask anything. Just stared at me for a few seconds, before sighing. The test results came back. My fingers were intertwined in my lap, so tightly they hurt. Sophia was poisoned. The word hung in the air. Poisoned. My mind refused to accept it. It meant someone had done it on purpose. Someone had given poison to a 7-year-old girl. It means you didn't do anything, he finished. Relief should have come, but it didn't. Because if I hadn't done anything, then I had. I was released shortly after, but the weight of the accusation was still on me. Louis didn't look in my direction. Carlos spoke little. The house that once seemed like a home, albeit a cold one, was now just an empty space filled with grief and distrust. The following days were a confusion of investigations, reports, whispers from neighbors. Little by little, the truth began to be revealed. They discovered that Carlos had been having an affair for months. The mistress was a younger woman he met on a business trip. The fights between him and Louis, the distance. Everything made sense. Now, divorce was imminent. But there was a problem. Carlos didn't want to lose money, didn't want to face a long and exhausting process, didn't want Louis to have any advantage, didn't want the betrayal to come to light. And then came the cruelest part of all. Someone and the police believe that someone was the mistress herself found a monstrous solution. A tragedy could change everything. Sophia was a link. A guarantee that Louis would never completely leave Carlos's life. But without Sophia, Louis would be emotionally destroyed. And perhaps, just perhaps, that meant she wouldn't fight so hard in the divorce. It was sick, abominable, but it happened. The substance was mixed into something Sophia ate, a poison that acted slowly, corroding from the inside, gradually extinguishing the life of an innocent child. The mistress was arrested. Carlos was also arrested. There was no proof that he had directly planned the death of his own daughter, but his negligence, his omission, and his selfishness were more than enough to ruin her. I never went back to that house. I didn't want to know what happened to her afterward, and I was acquitted. But that didn't mean much. The city knew my name. My neighbors whispered when I passed by. Some families who previously considered me a good maid began to look at me with suspicion, as if the mere shadow of that tragedy made me desirable. But the worst of all was not that. The worst was the silence. The silence of the house without Sophia, running through the corridors. The silence of the nights in which I wondered if I could have done something different. If I could have saved that girl who deep down I loved. The rest of the text appears to be gibberish and doesn't translate directly. Her hair was neatly combed brown, and her posture was impeccable. There was a calculated calmness in her gestures, as if she were always conscious of every movement. She led me inside without much ceremony and began to show me the main rooms. The house was even more impressive inside, with dark wood furniture, enormous chandelier, and antique paintings that seemed to stare at me as we passed through the hallways. While she explained the routine, Agatha appeared at the top of the stairs, a little girl of 6 years old, wearing a light blue dress, holding a somewhat worn teddy bear. She had long dark hair and large, curious eyes. As she hurried down the steps, Donna Veronica just looked at her with a serious expression, and Agatha stopped halfway down as if she understood that she should maintain her composure. She smiled at me and asked my name, Isabel. Primera smiled back. I like you. The mother cleared her throat, and Agatha quickly descended the remaining steps, holding the hem of her dress. Donna Veronica explained that my main function would be to take care of cleaning the house, and occasionally help with Agatha. The girl had a nanny who stayed with her for part of the day, but I should be available if they needed anything. I felt it without finding anything strange until I saw something that intrigued me at the end of the second floor corridor. There were 3 locked doors with large unclear. Possibly a typo. Should be big or big. Iron locks, I asked about them, but the boss only answered in a neutral tone, old rooms. Do you want to worry about them? I didn't insist, but the way she said that made me uneasy. The first few days passed without incident. The routine was simple. The house was always clean, and Agatha seemed to like my presence. Sometimes she would come to the kitchen to ask me random questions, or just watch me while I worked. It was on one of those afternoons while I was mopping the hallway on the second floor that I heard a muffled sound behind one of the doors locked. It was as if someone had moved a heavy piece of furniture inside. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, trying to listen better, but silence reigned again. It could be the noise of the housewood expanding, something like that, but still my curiosity was aroused the next day while I was putting Agita's toys back in the box. She looked at me with that look. Seriously, that didn't suit a child your age. Have you heard her? I stopped. What was I doing? And turned to the girl, who Agatha looked at the door as if she feared that someone was listening. The woman in the black dress, she lives here. The natural way in which she said that, which made me uncomfortable. Who told you that? Nobody. She talks to me. I tried not to show concern, but the conversation left me uneasy. In the following days, I noticed that Agatha started to change. She, who used to follow me around the house, became more reclusive, talking less and drawing all the time. One day, while organizing her desk, I found one of her drawings. It was a sketch done with colored pencils. The silhouette of a woman in a black dress, standing in what seemed to be the second floor hallway next to it. Agatha had drawn herself holding the figure's hand. At that same instant, a creaking sound came from the hallway. I looked up and saw that one of the locked doors was slightly ajar. I stood in the hallway for a few seconds, looking at the ajar door. I was sure that all the doors were closed. When I went upstairs, a cold wind blew through the hallway, making me shiver. I forced myself to think that maybe Agatha had moved it before and hadn't closed it properly. I walked slowly over there, pushed the door with my fingertips, and saw that the room was dark. The smell of old wood and dampness filled my nostrils. I didn't just go in. I pushed the door until it was completely closed and turned the key in the lock, trying to ward off any absurd ideas that might arise in my head. In the following days, the feeling of unease didn't go away. I kept hearing noises on the second floor, especially at night when I lay down in the small maid-s room at the back of the house. It seemed like someone was walking down the hallway with shuffling steps, followed by a low, continuous sound, like a muffled whisper. One night I mustered up the courage and opened my bedroom door to check, but I only found the hallway empty and silent. When I turned to go back, I heard a slight crack coming from upstairs, followed by something dragging itself across the floor. I quickly closed the door, locking it. It seemed different. Her eyes were deeper. She would sit for hours in the living room scribbling on papers without saying anything. One day, while making her bed, I found another drawing hidden under the pillow. This time it was a dark hallway, and the woman in the black dress was clearer. Her face had no defined contours, but her eyes were two black holes. There was something written next to the figure in a childish and trembling handwriting. Say kayed mi. I took the paper to Agatha and asked what it meant. She slowly raised her eyes as if she already knew I would bring that, and smiled strangely. She wants to meet you. I felt a chill run down my spine. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Agatha, who is she? The girl looked at the stairs and whispered, "Have you seen her?" Those words stuck in my mind. Since then, I started noticing the figure in the black dress in the corner of my vision, always in glimpses, as if she were spying on me. A shadow that appeared the instant I turned my head to look directly. One night, leaving the bathroom and turning off the hallway light, I clearly saw the outline of someone standing next to the door of one of the rooms. Looked up, my heart raced. But when PC there was nothing there. I tried to talk to Donna Veronica about it. I took advantage of a moment when Agatha was playing in the garden and asked directly who else lives here. She, who was reading a book, didn't raise her eyes besides the three of us. Nobody. I paused, choosing my words carefully before continuing. I hear things at night. Footsteps, whispers, and Agatha has a fertile imagination. She interrupted me. This time she looked at me firmly. Don't let yourself be carried away. The tone was definitive. I understood that conversation wouldn't go any further. Later, while organizing the pantry, I heard a dry noise coming from the living room. I went there and found Agatha kneeling on the floor, looking down one of the hallways. She was trembling. What a pen. She didn't answer. I knelt beside her and followed her gaze. The hallway was empty, but the air was heavier. "Say, come here," the girl murmured, clutching the teddy bear tightly. I swallowed hard. What does she want? Agatha turned her face slowly towards me, her eyes brimming with tears. I opened the door. That night I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come. The silence, the atmosphere in the house was tense, as if something was lurking, waiting for me to close my eyes. The noises upstairs started again, but this time they weren't just footsteps or whispers. The sound was different, a heavy dragging, as if someone were pushing furniture against the floor. I sat on the bed, my heart racing. I needed to see what it was. I left the room and slowly climbed the stairs. Each step creaked under my feet, and with each step, I felt like I was being watched. When I reached the second floor hallway, the cold was almost unbearable. One of the forbidden rooms had its door, ajar, the same one I had locked days before. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was small and dark, without furniture. Just an old armchair in the corner and a dusty rug on the wooden floor. The smell was strong, a mixture of mold and something more metallic, almost ferrous. What caught my attention were the papers scattered on the floor. I bent down and started picking them up. They were drawings, hundreds of drawings. Each sheet showed the same figure. The woman in the black dress. Some scribbles were childish, clearly done by Agatha, but others were ... more. Older ones with nervous and precise strokes. Some showed only the dark silhouette standing in the hallway. Others showed the woman leaning over a bed, her eyes empty, her long, thin hands outstretched. In one of them, Agatha was drawn holding the figure's hand, exactly as in the drawing I found before. But there were more. There were other children drawn beside her. My hands trembled. When I picked up the last sheet, there was a different drawing on it. The face of the woman in the black dress, and I had seen it before. I felt a chill run down my neck. The air in the room changed. It became denser. I stood up quickly, throwing the papers on the floor. I needed to get out of there. I turned to the door, but before I could take a step, it closed by itself with a deafening bang. I ran to it and turned the doorknob forcefully. It was locked. The room became darker, as if the shadows had spread across the walls. The wooden floor began to creak under my feet, and a low, deep sound filled the space like a prolonged whisper. Then I heard the laughter. It echoed through the room, childish, high-pitched, multiplying, until filling every corner of the house. Agatha screamed, banging on the door, but the sound of laughter increased, mixing with something deeper. Something that didn't seem human. The walls began to move. At first, I thought it was an illusion, but then I saw the drawings detaching themselves, spinning in the air as if they were being pulled by something invisible. The carpet on the floor began to wrinkle as if something was crawling underneath it. The whisper grew louder. They weren't words, they were distorted sounds, as if something was trying to speak. Unable to form complete sentences, the dim light of the hallway flickered through the crack in the door. Then a shadow passed by. The room went completely dark. Something breathed behind me. My body froze. The air around me became heavy, dense, as if I were submerged. I felt a presence behind me, so close that I could hear the damp sound of breathing. I closed my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to see, but then something cold touched my shoulder. I screamed and threw myself against the door, banging hard, pulling the doorknob, desperately trying to get out. From there, Agatha's laughter echoed down the hallway. But now, it seemed distorted, superimposed on a deep murmur that spread through the room. The wall to my right began to bend inward as if something were pushing from the inside out. The shadows grew, taking up all the space. Then the door opened by itself. I fell backward in the hallway, the impact taking my breath away. The light flickered, and for a brief moment I saw Agatha at the end of the hallway, standing hand in hand with a tall, dark silhouette. The girl smiled, and the figure beside her leaned slowly as if observing me. Veronica sat me down on the sofa, running her hands over her face, visibly shaken. The silence that followed was long. "You saw, didn't you?" I nodded. She sighed, looking away. "That woman, ... She was my sister." A shiver ran down my spine. "It was Mrs. Veronica." She nodded slowly. "She died in this room." My breath caught in my throat. She continued. "My sister Helena was very ill. She spent days locked up, talking to herself, drawing those things. Our father kept her hidden, saying it was for her safety and the family's, until one day she did. ... double quotes. A pause, her eyes welling up with tears. She hanged herself. The words fell heavily in the air. Since then, she never left. Everything made sense. The noises, the whispers, the drawings of AA and Agatha. Mrs. Veronica ran her hand through her hair nervously. I tried to protect her, but Helena found a way to reach her. I stood up impulsively. "Your daughter is playing with your sister's spirit, and you tell me this like that?" She grabbed my arm. "You think I never tried to stop her? I did everything, Isabel. Helena wants company." I swallowed hard. "Company. Company. She doesn't want to be alone." Those ... double quotes words hit me like a punch. I felt a weight on my chest as if something was pulling me into an abyss. I looked at the stairs. "I can't stay here." Donna Veronica didn't say anything. She just let me go. I left that house without looking back. I walked as fast as I could to the gate, my heart racing, my legs weak. The last thing I heard was Agata's soft voice coming from the top of the stairs. She still wants to meet you. I didn't go back to get my things. I never went down that street again. But sometimes, when I am alone in my apartment, I feel a cold shiver and see something in the corner of my vision. A silhouette standing quietly in the hallway, waiting, and I wonder if I really escaped. Working at Donna Luche's house was never exactly difficult. The work was easy, the payment was never late, and apart from one or two strange requests, she didn't demand anything beyond what was expected, but there was something about that house that always made me uncomfortable, although I never knew how to explain it properly. Maybe it was the location, far from the city, surrounded by trees, and with that constant silence that after a while started to weigh on me. Or maybe it was Donna Lucha herself. Although polite, she never showed affection or interest in my life. It was as if I were part of the furniture, something that was there to fulfill a function and nothing more. She lived with her son Marcos, but it was rare to see him. He worked traveling and only appeared occasionally, always in passing. I knew little about him beyond what Donna Lucia let slip in her rare conversations. A very busy businessman who supported the household and made a point of keeping his mother comfortable. It was strange to think that someone so absent could have so much influence there. But that's what happened. Whenever Marcos called, Donna Lucia's mood changed. Sometimes she became irritable and impatient. Other times she locked herself in her room and spent hours without saying a word. In general, the days followed the same routine. I arrived early, organized the kitchen, cleaned the rooms, and if there was time left, I helped Donna Lucia with something she needed. She wasn't much of a talker, but she had very peculiar habits. She liked to drink tea every day at the same time and insisted that the cup always be the same blue porcelain one with gold details. She also had an obsession with the position of the furniture. If I moved a chair to sweep, I had to put it back in exactly the same place, or she would complain. Over time, I got used to these quirks. It wasn't anything that interfered with the work, and I had seen worse in other houses where I worked. But sometimes, for no apparent reason, I felt a strange shiver while cleaning the rooms or walking down the hallway, as if I felt like someone was watching me. At first, I thought it was all in my head. The isolation and silence made any noise seem louder than it actually was. But once, while organizing the living room bookshelf, I clearly heard a whisper coming from the hallway. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. My heart raced, and I laughed at myself. It was just the wind, Primetta told myself. Or maybe Donna Lucia had said something in the room, and the sound had echoed. I tried not to pay much attention, but these little things started to accumulate. Doors that seemed to creak on their own, a slight crack on the floor as if someone had stepped there. And the strangest thing was that sometimes I thought Donna Lucia noticed too. I caught her looking down the hallway with a furrowed brow or murmuring something to herself. Once, I mustered up the courage and asked if she had ever heard strange noises in the house. She looked at me for a long time before answering. Sometimes, yes, but I don't like to talk about it. The answer made me uneasy. If even she felt something strange, maybe I wasn't imagining it, but I let it go. It wasn't my business. I just worked there, nothing more. The days went by, and everything continued as usual, until one rainy day everything began to change. The day dawned dark, heavy with dense clouds, and soon the first drops began to hit the windows of the house. Rain was common in that region, but that morning it seemed different. The air was heavy and stifling, as if announcing something bad. When I arrived, I found Donna Lucia sitting at the kitchen table, her hands trembling around a teacup. She didn't greet me, nor did she even look in my direction. I asked if everything was all right, and she took a while to answer, as if she were gathering strength. I have a tightness in my chest, she murmured without taking her eyes off the steaming liquid. I offered to call a doctor, but she shook her head impatiently, as if the suggestion were absurd. She said she had been through this before, that it was just a feeling. I tried to insist, but the answer came sharply, and I knew it was better not to argue. Even so, I spent the day worried. From time to time, while cleaning the rooms, I would cast discreet glances at her, who remained motionless at the table, her fingers drumming on the porcelain. The weather worsened. Thunder echoed in the distance. The house lights flickered occasionally. Donna Lucia began acting strangely. At one point, I saw her sitting in the living room armchair, staring at the dark hallway. I approached and asked if she needed anything, and without looking away, she murmured, "There's someone here." A shiver ran down my spine. I looked in the same direction but saw nothing but the shadows elongated by the lightning outside. I stood beside her, trying to understand if it was delirium or some fear she didn't want to confess. I asked who she thought was there, and the answer came so low I almost didn't hear it. It came back. Her voice was weak, almost childlike, and that made me even more uneasy. "Marcos?" I asked, trying to make sense of it, but she just closed her eyes and shook her head as if I couldn't understand. Night fell, bringing a strong wind that made the windows vibrate. Donna Luce had gone to her room early, refusing dinner. I decided to continue my routine and began cleaning the living room, trying to ignore the bad feeling that had been with me since early morning. The noise of the storm drowned out any other sound, but then I heard something different. A long, dragging creak coming from the hallway. I stopped what I was doing and listened attentively. Then I heard a dull sound, as if something had fallen. My heart raced and I ran towards the noise. The bedroom door was ajar. I hesitated for a second before pushing it open. The dim light of the lamp flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. That's when I saw Mrs. Lucia was on the floor. Her body twisted strangely. I trembled as I got closer and saw the deep, purplish finger marks on her neck. She hadn't just died. She had been The house was locked from the inside, and I had been there the whole time. How was this possible? I stood up to call the police, but a shiver ran down my neck as if someone was right behind me. The room was empty. When the police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry. Then her son, Marcos, showed up. His voice was harsh as he looked at me and said, "Funny, my mother always suspected you." He accused me of being nosy, of prying into their lives. The police officially ruled it an accident, but Marcos never believed it. He made my life a living hell, and I could feel a presence lingering in that house, a shadow in the corner of my eye. Mrs. Lucia was lying on the floor, her body contorted in a strange way, her mouth slightly open as if she wanted to scream but couldn't. I approached, trembling, from head to toe. When I knelt beside her, I saw the marks on her neck, deep, purplish finger marks. A chill overwhelmed me. She wasn't just dead, she had been strangled. My mind tried to find an explanation, but nothing made sense. The bedroom door was closed, the house locked. I had been there the whole time. Who could have done this? My first instinct was to run to the phone and call the police. But when I stood up, I felt a shiver run down my neck as if someone was behind me. Quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. But the room was empty. Only the wind shook the curtains, making the shadows dance. My hands trembled as I dialed the police. The operator's voice seemed distant, unreal, and I could barely form the words. I could only say that my boss was dead, that someone had done this, that I was alone in the house and needed help. They told me to wait, said a patrol car was on its way. But how? The air felt thick and heavy, as if I wasn't alone there. Every shadow, every little noise made my heart race. I went to the front door and unlocked it. I didn't want to be trapped there for even a second longer than necessary. I tried to call Marcos, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried 2 more times without success. He needed to know. He needed to come. The police arrived quickly. Considering the distance from the city, 2 officers entered and asked me to move away from the body. One of them knelt beside Donna Lucia while the other began to ask me questions. His voice was firm, but without hostility. He wanted to know what happened, how I found her, if there was anyone else in the house. I answered as best I could, but everything seemed confusing. I myself didn't know what to say. They checked the entire house, inspected doors and windows, but found no signs of forced entry. One of the policemen approached me with a strange look, as if he were analyzing every detail of my face, my tone of voice, the way I breathed. He asked if I had argued with Donna Lucia that night. I replied that I hadn't, that she had spent the day acting strangely but quietly. The wait for Marcos was long. He appeared when the coroners were already removing the body. He came hurriedly, his steps firm, his expression closed. When I saw him standing in the room, his eyes narrowed. He approached and asked what happened. His voice was harsh, as if he already had his own version of the facts before even hearing mine. I explained everything, from Donna Lucia's strange behavior to the moment I found her fallen. As I spoke, I saw his jaw tense. When I finished, he crossed his arms and stared at me for a few seconds before speaking. "Funny," he murmured. My mother always suspected you. The blood ran cold in my veins. I asked what he meant by that, and he took a step back, looking at the police officers. She said you were nosy, that you walked around the house when you shouldn't, that you asked too many questions about our lives. The insinuation was there. Clara, one of the police officers, was writing everything down. The other was observing me. I never disrespected Donna Lucia, I replied, feeling my voice falter, but Marcos didn't seem interested in what I was saying. Maybe she confronted you about something. Maybe she discovered something. He looked around as if searching for proof of something that only existed in his head. And maybe that bothered you. The impact of his words hit me. Like a punch. Are you saying I did this? My own voice sounded distant, as if it wasn't coming from me, but Marcos, she just shrugged. My mother was a frail woman, and now she's dead with marks on her neck. The tension in the room was suffocating. I saw the police officers exchanging glances, evaluating each of our reactions. It was as if I had been ripped from reality and thrown into a nightmare with no way out. I tried to argue, saying that the house was locked, that I myself called the police, that it didn't make sense. But the more I spoke, the more it seemed like I was trying to defend myself from something that had already been decided. The following days were a blur. The police concluded that Donna Lucia's death was an accident. They said that given her age and health history, she may have suffered a sudden illness and fallen in a way that resulted in the marks on her neck. I heard the verdict, sitting in the police station, not knowing what to think. An accident. But that didn't explain the strange feeling I had that night, nor the whispers, nor the terror in Donna Lucia's eyes. Hours before she died. I wasn't indicted, but the doubt was never completely erased. During the interrogation, there were comments about my behavior, about how I was the only one present in the house, and how my version of the facts seemed vague. In the end, they let me go, but with an implicit warning that I would be under observation. Marcos took over the house immediately, the day after the funeral. He was already organizing his mother's belongings, deciding what would stay and what would be discarded. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, he was cold and direct. I knew he didn't believe the story about the accident. In fact, I think he never cared about the truth from the beginning. He just wanted someone to blame. I continued working at the house for a while longer, but things never went back to normal. Marcos didn't tell me to leave, but he made it clear that he wanted me away. He gave me lingering glances while I cleaned the rooms. Sometimes I arrived at work and found things out of place, as if someone had been messing with my things. One day I opened a cupboard and found Donna Lucia's old teacup broken in half, carefully placed on a white towel. I didn't ask anything. I just swept up the shards and continued my work. The images of that night never left me. I avoided looking down the hallway after sunset because it always seemed like something was standing there, in the dark. But the worst part was the constant feeling of being watched. I couldn't tell if it came from Marcos or from something that remained in the house afterward. After Donna Lucia's death, I ended up leaving shortly after. I resigned without giving any explanations and left without looking back. Marcos didn't try to stop me. He just nodded and closed the door before I even finished taking my last step outside. I never went back there. I didn't know what he did with the house, whether he sold it or continued living there. But even today, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with the memory of that door. The wind shaking the curtains and the contorted body on the floor. I never discovered the truth about what happened to Donna Lucia, and I think I never will. But one thing I know, in that house that night, there was someone else. Besides the two of us, I accepted the job at Sousa's house without thinking much. The offer was good, better than I was used to, and Donna Sousa seemed to be a calm woman. It was a large, old, well-kept house, but with that characteristic smell of aged wood and waxed furniture. As soon as I entered, I felt an unease difficult to explain, as if the air there was different, heavier. I wasn't the impressionable type, but the first few days were enough to realize that something was wrong. It was strange in that house. The routine was simple. I arrived early, cleaned the main rooms, helped in the kitchen when necessary, and took care of the laundry. Mrs. Sousa spent a good part of her time in her room or in her husband's office, who had passed away a few years ago. The house was silent, and perhaps that was what bothered me the most. Even when I was alone in a room, the feeling of presence was constant. Sometimes, while sweeping the second-floor hallway, I was sure I had seen something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, moving or something shifting in the reflection of a window, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing. Mrs. Sousa was reserved but kind, always very polite, asking if I was enjoying myself. or if I needed anything. But as the days went by, I began to notice that her behavior was subtly changing. Sometimes I would find her standing in the middle of the room staring at a fixed point on the wall. On other occasions, she would call me over to ask if I had heard any noise. I never heard anything, but she insisted, saying it seemed to come from upstairs. That's how I started noticing the attic. The door was at the end of the second-floor hallway, half hidden between a cupboard and a bookcase full of old books. I don't remember noticing it in the first few days, but now it seemed to always be there, drawing my attention. It was a dark wooden door with a rusty latch and a lock that looked like it had been used in a long time. Whenever I passed by it, I felt a shiver down my neck. One day, while cleaning the hallway, I heard a muffled noise coming from inside, a hollow sound as if something had been dragged. I stopped for a moment, cleaning cloth in hand, trying to listen better. The silence returned, and I convinced myself that it must have just been the woods settling, as happens in old houses. I decided not to think too much about it, but as the days went by, I began to realize that the attic door seemed different. I can't say exactly how. Maybe the wood was darker, or the latch more worn, or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the unease grew. Sometimes while working in the house, I had the impression that the door was slightly ajar, even though I knew I had never seen it open before. One afternoon, while folding clothes in Mrs. Sousa's room, I heard the sound again coming from upstairs, but this time it was clearer. Footsteps stopped for a moment, and then a long creak, as if someone were opening the door. My whole body shivered. "Did you hear that, ma'am?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Sousa was sitting in the armchair next to the window. She took a few seconds to answer. "What?" "The noise seems to have come from the attic." She took a deep breath and looked away at the wall. "It must have been the wind," she said, but there was no wind. All the windows were closed. That night, when I left the Sousa house, the image of the attic door wouldn't leave my head. Something told me I needed to see what was inside. In the following days, Mrs. Sousa's behavior became stranger. She seemed distracted, sometimes even confused, as if she hadn't slept well. Whenever I entered a room where she was staring at some point in space as if she were listening to something I could unhear. When I called her name, she blinked a few times before reacting, as if she were returning from a trance. The most visible change was the way she started avoiding the second floor. Before, she used to spend hours in the office or her own room, but now she seemed restless, always making excuses to stay in the living room or kitchen. One morning, while I was sweeping the hallway, I saw her approaching the stairs to go up, but halfway there she stopped. She stood there holding the handrail, looking up as if she saw something I couldn't see. Then, without saying anything, she turned and went back to the living room. The discomfort I felt in that house only increased. The noises coming from the attic were more frequent. Scratches, creaks, sometimes a muffled sound that resembled a sigh. I also began to notice that whenever I passed through the second-floor hallway, the attic door was sometimes slightly ajar. I swore I had seen it closed, but then, when passing by again, it was slightly ajar. One night before leaving, Mrs. Sousa grabbed my arm. "Sandra, have you felt something strange in the house?" The way she asked me, it sent shivers down my spine. "What does the lady mean?" Elit, and then back to me. "Have you opened the attic door yet?" The way she asked left me with the feeling that she already knew the answer. "No." She pressed her lips together, looking thoughtful. "If you hear anything, ignore it." I wanted to ask more, but she let go of my arm and left the kitchen, leaving me there with the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The next morning, I made my decision. I needed to see what was inside. I waited for a moment when Mrs. Sousa was busy in the garden and went up the stairs. My heart was pounding as I approached the attic door. The latch was cold when I touched it, and the wood creaked when I pushed it. The smell of dust and mold was strong. The dim light from the window, covered by yellowed curtains, barely illuminated the room. The attic was full of old furniture, stacked boxers, and things that seemed untouched for years. I advanced carefully, trying to orient myself in the space inside. It was different from the rest of the era. More stuffy. The mirror was large, with a dark, worn frame. The glass was dusty, but it reflected the attic strangely clearly. I looked at my reflection, but something was wrong. There was a slight delay in my movements, as if the image took a fraction of a second longer to follow my gestures. My stomach tightened. That's when I saw someone behind me, reflected in the mirror. A tall man with a pale face and deep-set eyes. He wore old, dark clothes and was standing there staring at me. I turned quickly, but the attic was empty. My eyes returned to the mirror, and he was still there. The figure didn't move, but it seemed alive. The eyes seemed to truly see me. I wanted to run. I wanted to get out of there, but my feet were stuck to the ground. An intense cold ran through my body when I saw something even worse. The figure began to smile. My whole body froze before that. The smile of the figure in the mirror wasn't natural. It was something distorted, exaggerated, as if the skin of the face was being pulled from the inside. Every part of me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. The figure raised its head slightly, as if observing me more closely. Then its lips began to move. There was no sound, but I could understand it was saying my name. I don't know where I got the strength from, but I managed to move away. My shoulder bumped into a box, knocking some objects to the floor, and the noise seemed to break the torpor I was in. I spun on my heels and ran towards the attic door. Behind me, I heard a dry crack, as if the mirror had cracked. I didn't look back. I went down the stairs, almost tripping, and went straight to the living room. Mrs. Souza was sitting on the sofa, her hands resting on her knees, looking at the floor. "You saw, didn't you?" Her voice came out weak, but unsurprisingly, my chest rose and fell with accelerated breathing. "What is that?" She took a while to answer. Her eyes were sunken and tired. "My husband bought that mirror years ago in an antique shop. Since he arrived, the house has never been the same." The silence stretched between us. Then she looked directly at me. "He died a short time later. That night, when Eni swallowed it in seconds, the mirror was turned towards horror." My God, I wanted to ask more. I wanted to understand, but at the same time, everything inside me. He yelled at me to leave. "You should go, Sandra, before it's too late." I didn't wait any longer. I ran upstairs, grabbed my bag, and left Sousa's house without looking back. The next day, I called Mrs. Souza and resigned. She didn't insist that I stay. She just thanked me for the time I worked there and hung up. I moved house shortly after. I tried to move on, forget all that, convince myself that my mind had played a trick on me, but I couldn't. In the first few days in the new house, I started to notice something strange in the mirrors, small delays in the reflection, as if my movements took a fraction of a second longer to be replicated. At first, I thought it was paranoia, tiredness. But then one night, while brushing my teeth in front of the bathroom mirror, I saw behind me a motionless shadow looking at me. I turned around instantly, but there was nothing, just the empty bathroom and the heavy silence. Since then, I know that it never went away. It follows me, always lurking on the edge of the reflection where I can't see directly, and the worst part is that from time to time at night, when I pass by a mirror, I see this smile working in the house. At first glance, Mrs. Vittoria's offer seemed like a better opportunity than any other I'd ever had. The mansion, located in a prime area of Isi, Ubernacht do Campo, was enormous, beautifully decorated, and quiet most of the time. My job wasn't difficult. Cleaning, cooking, and keeping everything in its place. Mrs. Vittoria was always reserved, very polite, but distant. Unlike other employers I've had, she didn't care much about conversations. She didn't care about my life, and similarly, she didn't like questions about hers. Right on the first day, after introducing me to the house routine, she made a statement that sounded strange to me. "Never go up to the third floor." "That space doesn't need cleaning, Luciana," she said without changing her tone of voice, without any explanation. Just a dry warning, as if it were an unimportant detail. I found it strange, of course, but I didn't ask anything. I accepted the order without questioning. At that moment, I saw no reason to worry. The first day passed without anything unusual. The house was large, but always seemed empty. Mr. Moro, Mrs. Vittoria's husband, spent long periods away, and they didn't have children. At least not that lived there. There was only me, and sometimes a gardener who appeared to take care of the yard. Despite the constant silence and the seriousness of the employer, the environment was peaceful. I liked the work, but little by little I began to notice small details that bothered me. Sometimes, when I was alone, I felt a strange presence, as if someone was watching me. It was a subtle discomfort, a shiver down my neck while washing the dishes, or a sudden chill in the hallways, even on hot days. But what really made me uncomfortable were the noises during the afternoon when I was cleaning the cobblestones on the second floor. I would hear light, quick footsteps on the ceiling, as if someone were walking barefoot upstairs. It was impossible not to think about the forbidden third floor. At first, I tried to ignore it, attributing the noises to the wind or the structure of the house. But over time, it became difficult to find explanations. One night, when I was about to leave, I heard something different. A low sound, almost a murmur, coming from the top of the stairs leading to the third floor. I stopped instinctively, not knowing whether I should continue or pretend nothing had happened. For a moment, I thought it was Mrs. Vittoria, but she was already asleep. The murmur continued and sounded childish, as if a child were whispering something to herself. My heart raced. I took a deep breath, took a step back, and left the house in a hurry. The next day, I avoided any mention of what had happened. I continued working normally, but my curiosity was growing. Who else lived there? Or rather, what was on that floor? The days passed, and my routine continued almost normally, but the feeling of unease grew each day. I tried to ignore the noises, telling myself they were just old household sounds. But deep down I knew it wasn't just that. What bothered me most was the fact that the sounds were becoming more distinct. They weren't just footsteps. Sometimes I heard what seemed to be something scratching wood, other times small creaks as if someone were moving furniture. And then one afternoon I heard something that made me freeze. A low, muffled laugh. A child's laugh. I stopped in the middle of cleaning the living room, cloth still in my hands, and held my breath. My eyes automatically turned to the stairs on the third floor. Nothing was moving, but the feeling that someone was up there made me uneasy. I took a deep breath and tried to push that thought away. I couldn't let myself be carried away by my imagination. It was just an old house. The worst part was realizing that the noises became more intense when I was alone. In moments when Mrs. Vittoria was around, everything remained in absolute silence. I had already finished my work and was locking the back door when I saw out of the corner of my eye a small silhouette near the stairs. My body froze. The figure was standing at the bottom of the stairs, partially hidden by the shadow. It was a child, a boy. He seemed to be about to see. Or if he is, the dark hair fell on Shio's face. He looked at me in a strange way, neither scared nor curious, just too quiet. I turned completely around, not knowing what to say. I did not know there was a child in that house. Could it be a relative of Mrs. Vittoria? Someone I had never seen? Hi, my voice came out, low, almost hesitant. Are you lost? The boy blinked slowly, then shook his head. My brother lives upstairs, he said, pointing to the stairs on the third floor. My mouth went dry. Your brother, he nodded, without changing his expression. I looked at the stairs. The upstairs was dark. As always, a shiver ran down my spine when I looked back at the child. A second later, he was no longer there. I turned, completely searching around the room. Trying to understand where he had gone so fast, I ran to the kitchen door, checked the hallways, even the backyard, but there was no sign of any child. The house was empty. I wanted to convince myself that I had imagined it, that my mind was tired, that the noises and the tension were affecting me, but deep down, I knew that boy had been there and he was talking about someone who I lived on the third floor. The next day, I arrived early and tried to act as if nothing had happened. I did my work in silence, always avoiding looking at the stairs. But at a certain moment, when I was dusting the furniture in the second floor hallway, I heard a door close upstairs. The noise was clear and distinct, and it made me drop everything I was doing. My heart raced. I was alone in the house. I took a few hesitant steps to the end of the hallway where the stairs began. I looked up into the darkness of the third floor. The door that had slammed shut was still trembling a little. Someone was there. My breath caught in my throat, and a chill ran down my spine. I stood there for a while, not knowing what to do. My impulse was to go upstairs, but my reason told me to stay where I was. Who was there? What would I find if I crossed those stairs? Suddenly, a crack echoed in the hallway beside me. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I looked quickly, and to my surprise, there he was again. The boy. He was staring at me the same way as the night before. Quiet and still. He's waiting for you, he sighed softly. Before I could react, he ran. But this time I saw him clearly. He launched himself up the stairs, disappearing into the third floor. My body, the whole thing stiffened. A clear thought popped into my head. I needed to find out what was happening there. My decision to go up to the third floor was impulsive, but deep down I knew I had no choice. The noises, the boy, the doors closing on their own, everything was pressing me, pulling me toward that place I should avoid. The whole house seemed to conspire to make me get there. I climbed the steps slowly, my heart pounding. The air seemed heavier with each step. When I reached the top of the stairs, I found myself in a narrow, dimly lit hallway. There was a strange smell in the air, something stuffy mixed with a faint odor of old wood and dust. The silence was absolute. There were 3 doors in the hallway, all closed. I took a deep breath and went to the first one. I turned the doorknob slowly. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a small, empty room with only an armchair against the wall and a moldy rug on the floor. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but something in that space made me uneasy. I closed the door and went to the next one. The second room was similar. Accumulated dust, old furniture, a cracked mirror in a corner. The reflection in it seemed wrong. My own face seemed slightly distorted, as if I were smiling subtly, although my expression was neutral. A shiver ran down my spine, and I left as quickly as possible. Then I reached the third door. This time, when I touched the doorknob, a chill ran through my body. There was something different. I took a deep breath and pushed the door. The room was larger than the others, and, unlike the others, seemed to have been used recently. In the center, a child's bed, covered by a sheet stained with dust. Around it, strange symbols were scribbled on the walls. Irregular marks that seemed to have been made in a hurry. The smell of mold and something metallic mixed in the air. My gaze fixed on an object in the middle of the room. A doll. She was sitting on the floor with her dark eyes turned towards me. The fabric of the dress was dingy and there were dark stains scattered across her body. I didn't want to believe it, but those marks looked like dried blood. My chest tightened and a sense of urgency took over me. Something was very wrong there. When I turned to leave, the door slammed shut. I ran to it, pulled the doorknob, but it was locked. The air in the room became heavier. Then came the first sound, a low, prolonged scratch, followed by another on the wood of. The door began to vibrate under my hands. The sound spread through the walls, accompanied by childish ahs that seemed to come from all sides. I tried to scream, but my voice failed. The bedroom mirror emitted a loud crack, and my gaze was drawn to it against my vade. That's when I saw in the reflection a child materialize behind me. The same boy I had seen before, but now different. His face was too pale, his eyes deep and opaque. He smiled in a wrong way, stretching his lips at a strange angle. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't move. The child's smile widened a little more. His eyes widened, and then he whispered something I couldn't understand. The lamp on the ceiling flickered violently and went out. The room plunged into complete darkness. The darkness in the room seemed to last an eternity. I felt the air around me become denser and heavier, as if something invisible was holding me in place. The childish laughter turned into whispered murmurs, indecipherable words that seemed to echo inside my head. My fingers were still trembling on the doorknob of the door, but I knew it was no use pulling, so I closed my eyes and did the only thing left to do. I prayed softly, begging for it all to stop, and then out of nowhere the silence returned. When I opened my eyes, the lamp flickered one last time and lit up. The room was exactly as before. The doll was still in the same place, motionless. The mirror was still there, but now it only showed my sweaty and terrified reflection. The door that seconds before seemed locked opened effortlessly. When I tried again, I left without looking back the next day. I mustered up the courage and went to talk to Mrs. Vittoria. I didn't beat around the bush. I needed to understand what was happening in that. How she listened to me in silence while I described everything: the sounds, the boy, what I had seen in the mirror. Her face remained impassive until I mentioned the name. He whispered Emiliano. At that moment her expression changed. It was not surprise, nor fear, it was tiredness. You heard, she said after a long sigh. Then, without me needing to insist, she told me her son Emiliano died many years ago. The official version was an accident, but there were things that were never explained. She did not go into details. Just she said that after his death, strange events began to haunt the house. The third floor, where his room was isolated. She never had the courage to touch anything in there, never left. She finished with a vacant look. He was always here. I wanted to ask more, to understand better, But I realized that for her there were no more answers to be given. Only a bitter acceptance of what she had known for years. Even so, I couldn't accept it. Something in that story wasn't right. That's when I called my cousin Camila. She always believed in these things and had some knowledge about energies and spirituality. I told her everything, and her reaction was immediate. The mirror, if he appeared in the reflection, maybe that's why he's still here, she said. Spirits can get trapped in objects. The idea seemed absurd, but after everything I'd lived through, I no longer doubted anything. We returned to the house that night when Mrs. Vittori was sleeping. We went up to the 3rd floor together, carrying a hammer. Each step was a test of my courage, but I knew I couldn't back down. The room was the same, the mirror intact. Camila was direct. She didn't hesitate. She raised the hammer and struck the glass forcefully. The impact was deafening. The mirror cracked in several directions, reflecting dozens of distorted versions of us in each fragment. For a moment, I saw something that shouldn't be there. Eyes, mouths, smiles. Another blow, the glass shattered. The atmosphere immediately became heavier. The air seemed to vibrate around us. The room seemed to be breathing. A deep noise filled my ears, something between a lament and a distant roar. The floor trembled beneath our feet, then everything ceased. We stood there, breathless, staring at the shards scattered on the floor. The silence returned, but it was no longer oppressive. It was normal. Without saying a word, we left and never returned. We went back the next day. Primera resigned. I never saw Mrs. Vittori again, and I have no idea what happened to the house after that. But even today, sometimes I find myself wondering, did it work? Did Emiliano finally find peace? Or is he somehow still there, waiting for someone to open the wrong door again?